Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gil McGowan. I'm president of the Alberta Federation of Labour. I'm going to start with something of a controversial statement this afternoon. Danielle Smith is batshit crazy. Now, there's a lot of us in this crowd today who have said that comment or something like it over the past few weeks, and especially over the past few days since the UCP introduced the Alberta Alberta Sovereignty Act. It's cathartic for us to say things like this, and in many ways it's accurate, but I'd like to encourage everyone to be more specific in their criticism of the Alberta Sovereignty Act, because this is not just a case of a crazy premier. It is the case of a dangerous premier, a dangerous government, and a dangerous piece of legislation. Yes. The Alberta Sovereignty Act purports to be a piece of legislation that stands up for Albertans, but it's actually a piece of legislation that stands in the way of democracy. People need to understand that this act does at least 4 very dangerous things. The first thing that it does is usurp the power of our elected legislature. People have to understand that we here in Alberta we have inherited a democratic parliamentary tradition that says that decisions about important things in our society need to be made by our elected legislators in the legislature and in the parliament. But what this bill does is carve out a special set of circumstances where the Premier and her cabinet can change legislation without deference to our elected representatives. That is, by definition, anti-democratic, and we need to stand against it. The second dangerous thing that this piece of legislation does is usurp the power of our courts. So the legislation gives the power to interpret legislation, not to the courts where it's supposed to be interpreted, but to the politicians in the legislature. We don't get to decide in our legislatures or in our parliament what something is constitutional or not. That decision is made in our courts, and to simply try to usurp that power is to thumb your nose at our best democratic traditions and also the need for accountability in government. The courts are there for a reason. We cannot ignore them without threatening our democracy. The third dangerous thing that this piece of legislation does is purport to give our government the power to force organizations and other levels of government and administration in this country to actually violate legislation duly passed by duly elected federal authorities. It's basically saying that our federal government and our federal elections don't matter, don't mean anything. So we're going to have a government that's going to accrue for themselves the power to tell our school boards, to tell our city councils, to tell our police, our universities, our colleges, that not only should they ignore legislation passed by our duly elected federal government, but they should actively violate this. Shame. This is dangerous. Okay, and the fourth thing that this legislation does that is dangerous is that it restricts the ability of groups individuals and organizations to take the government to court on their legislation. And this one hits home for me as president of the Alberta Federation of Labour. Just 6 months ago, the Alberta Federation of Labour, on behalf of all our unions, we partnered with the families of 5 disabled kids to challenge this government's decision to unilaterally and against the science get rid of mask mandates in schools. And we won that case. Now I don't want to say that this is the only reason they did what they did in this Alberta Sovereignty Act, but we won in the courts and they didn't like it. So they've introduced a change in this bill that will make it much more difficult for groups like ours and parents like those who we worked with to challenge legislation in the courts. So not only are they usurping the power of the legislature, not only are they usurping the power of the courts, not only are they telling groups and organizations in our province to violate legislation, they are restricting our ability to have access to the courts. This is fundamentally undemocratic. In a democracy, we need to respect our elections. We need to respect our legislatures and our parliaments. We need to respect our courts, and in a democracy, we need to respect our citizens. This bill tramples over all of those rights. It is fundamentally undemocratic, and it is the beginning of authoritarianism. We've seen what's happened south of the border with Trump and the Make America Great movement. We've seen the rise of authoritarianism with Brexit in the United Kingdom. We've seen strong democracies actually crumble and fall in places like Hungary. And brothers and sisters, what I'm telling you today is Bill 1, the Sovereignty Act, is an example of that kind of authoritarian threat to democracies. It is no longer something that's happening across the border. It is no longer something that's happening across the ocean. This is the authoritarian tide washing up on our Canadian shores and coming right here to our province. And as Albertans who believe in democracy and the foundation that it provides for all the things that we care for and value, we need to fight not only this bill, we need to fight not only this government, we need to fight the forces of authoritarianism that threaten the foundations of our country. And we will win! We will win! We will win! We will